Welcome back, everybody, to another reaction video. Trying out a little something new here with the green screen today. Hope you like it. Let me know your thoughts about that. But today we're going to be looking at a channel called Grunge. And this is their video called 8 False American History Facts You Always Thought Were True. Now, I don't know how many of these we actually thought were true or not true. At least a couple of them, I think, are things I never thought was true, but maybe you thought differently. So let's take a look, and I'll give you my thoughts as we go along.
True at all. Bogus Betsy. Every school kid knows Betsy Ross created the first U.S. flag at George Washington's request, right? Wrong. Turns out that while Ross was a Philadelphia-based flag maker, which is apparently a job people can have, there's no actual evidence that she had anything to do with the American flag's creation. Ross's grandson spread the story almost 100 years later, and his only evidence were testimonials from family members. Somehow, a ridiculous family legend made its way into the history books, and as a result,
everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to it.
So who did design the flag if it wasn't crazy Grandma Betsy? Evidence points to Francis Hopkinson, one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. He actually sent the government a bill for his design work, asking to be paid with a big old barrel of wine. Now that's a true patriot.
So here's a couple of thoughts about this. Number one, I think he's mixing up two different sets of facts here. Number one, the design versus the creation. I don't think I've ever heard anybody say that Betsy Ross designed the flag. I think the question is, did she create it? And I think she probably did create the flag. Somebody else may have designed it and presented her with that design. It may very well have been Francis Hopkinson, and I don't think there's any reason to doubt that Hopkinson was the one who designed the flag. But I don't think it's too much to consider that Betsy Ross made the first flag. And one thing I found as a professional genealogist in my years of doing research into the facts versus family lore, one thing I can say is that 95% of the time, there's at least some truth to those family stories that get passed down. A perfect example, when I first met my wife, her dad kept telling me that his uncle had been a bodyguard for Abraham Lincoln. And I said, yeah, whatever, whatever. That's one of those stories that gets passed down. Come to do some research, find out that he did have a great uncle who was part of a unit called the Union Light Guard, which was a company of soldiers raised by the governor of Ohio for the protection of President Lincoln, because there was no Secret Service at the time or any personal bodyguard. It was a company made up of one of each of 88 counties from Ohio, one soldier from each county. So there was an element of truth. He did serve in a unit that was a bodyguard for Lincoln. I think that's probably the case here. I would not discount a story just because it was passed down in the family. I think that's probably a mix of truth and legend there.
Surrender? Why? Usually when the general of an army surrenders, the war ends. At least that's what it's like whenever a game of Risk goes on for longer than 3 hours and everyone just wants to stop and just go out for pizza already. Anyway, history says the American Civil War ended when General Robert E. Lee surrendered after the Battle of Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia on April 9, 1865. But that didn't stop that wacky Confederate army from fighting on. That included a 2-day confrontation known as the Battle of Palmito Ranch in Texas.
Yep.
The Confederates actually won that battle despite the war having been officially over for a month. This is kind of like staying on the field after the game's over and the stands are empty just to hit a few dingers. It's impressive, exciting, and completely pointless.
All right, so again, there's a difference between the war being officially over and the war being essentially over. Once Lee surrendered, it was a house of cards. It was a domino effect. There was very little fighting that took place. There's always situations where fighting takes place after the war. I think most people agree that the American Revolutionary War ended with the surrender at Yorktown, but it was 2 years after Yorktown before the war officially ended, and there was fighting that went on. In fact, I had an ancestor who was killed at the Battle of Blue Licks, Kentucky, and that was the better part of a year after Yorktown was over. And so that happened a lot. The Battle of New Orleans, the most famous battle of the War of 1812, happened after the war had actually ended and peace had been concluded. Of course, they didn't know that yet. So again, it's probably kind of a mixed bag. I wouldn't say that's completely false.
Talk is cheap, Abe. President Abraham Lincoln presented the Emancipation Proclamation on January 1st, 1863. But who was emancipated? Only slaves in Confederate states. You know, the states that had decided they weren't a part of America anymore and wouldn't listen to the president no matter what he said.
My presidential bitch!
Not only that, but
Well
the
then.
slave-holding states loyal to the Union, Delaware, Missouri, Maryland, and Kentucky, were still free to enjoy all the slavery they wanted. The U.S. finally made good on the Proclamation's promise years later when it ratified the 13th Amendment to the Constitution. Though, when it comes to things like slavery, better late than never still feels pretty hollow.
So, all right. So, let's talk about that for a second. Again, yeah, that is mostly true. But I would take it a step further. It wasn't just the Confederate States, but it was only the designated parts of the states that were actually in rebellion. So, for example, there were good chunks of the South where the states weren't in rebellion. Eastern Tennessee, for example, parts of Louisiana. So, yeah, it was meant as a war measure. It was really about shifting the narrative and changing the war, the goals, the aims of the war, giving the Union something greater to fight for than just preserving the Union. So this was as much about propaganda as it was about actually using this as an excuse to actually free some slaves. I do think that Lincoln was he was legit in wanting to free as many slaves as he could, and if that was the way that he could do it, fine. But he understood there was more to it than that. And he very wisely introduced it after what was kind of being spun as a victory at Antietam, even though it was really a draw.
False flag. You may think that the flag you spot on the backs of sunburned men, on women named Riley, and on the top of the car from the Dukes of Hazzard was once the official symbol of the Confederacy.
Nope.
You'd be dead wrong though, bro.
Wrong again.
In fact, that red background with the blue X and all the stars is actually the Confederate battle flag, the banner that the Army of Northern Virginia, led by General Robert E. Lee, flew during conflicts.
All right, I got to stop him right there because that is wrong. That is absolutely wrong. That is the battle flag of the Army of Tennessee. The battle flag of the Army of Northern Virginia looked just like that, but it was square. The one that we all call the Confederate flag today is the battle flag of the Army of Tennessee. Army of Northern Virginia, very similar, not exactly the same.
The official flag of the Confederacy actually changed 3 times during the American Civil War, but having 3 different designs would make it harder to sell at truck stops in Alabama. Better to use the one from TV. Rushing Russians. Some folks think that the United States and Russia have never met on the field of battle, with the exception of Rocky and Bullwinkle trying to get one over on Boris and Natasha. Not true. President Woodrow Wilson sent thousands of U.S. troops to Russia in September 1918. Along with soldiers from France, Great Britain, and Japan, their mission was to support Russia's White Movement, a force of anti-communist Russians opposed to the Bolsheviks, forerunners of the Soviet Union's Communist Party that had seized power during the October Revolution. It didn't work, though, and the bulk of the Allied forces pulled out of Russia by 1920. America got the last laugh, though, casting Russians as bad guys in movies ever since. Take that,
I don't really
Russia.
have a lot to add to that one.
Lucky 13. We all know the song.
I have never heard this song in my life. I don't know about we all know this song.
That song is a lie. There were only 12 colonies at the outset of the American Revolution in 1775. Delaware at that time was actually part of the colony of Pennsylvania,
No, it
not
wasn't.
becoming independent until June 1776. And
All right, let's pause for a second. I'm not even going to wait until he goes any further with that. I see where he's going with it. He's talking about Delaware and Pennsylvania having the same governor. That does not mean Delaware was not a separate colony with its own legislature, which it had. And the idea of one governor over multiple states was not unique to Pennsylvania and Delaware. New Jersey and New York shared governors at times. So did Massachusetts and New Hampshire. Completely 100% disagree with his assertion that Delaware was not its own colony. It was. All the way back to the 1600s. It was a separate colony.
And that's all anyone knows about Delaware, actually.
I'm in Delaware.
A dubious claim. It's true. Thomas Jefferson, or TJ as he liked to be called, used to grow hemp. Some folks even claim
Yeah,
that the
a lot of
first
people
drafts
did.
of the Declaration of Independence were written on hemp paper, and that maybe the official declaration itself was too. Sorry, Shaggy, but the Declaration of Independence is written on parchment, not hemp. And no, the Constitution
I've
is
never
not
heard
written on
anybody
hemp either.
argue that it was written
On the
on
other
hemp.
hand, everything that Nicolas Cage did in National Treasure actually happened.
I'm gonna steal the Declaration of Independence.
So, at least there's that.
And there's never that few
Crack up.
people in there either.
As a symbol of America's enthusiasm for freedom, Philadelphia's Liberty Bell is pretty rad. Legend has it that the bell cracked after patriots rang the thing too hard on July 4th, 1776.
I've never heard that.
Too bad, that's a load of garbage. The bell actually started cracking years earlier, starting in 1752, and required constant maintenance during its
That
run
is
in the
true.
Pennsylvania State House. The crack you see in Philadelphia's famous bell today likely occurred in the 1840s. The Liberty Bell was the equivalent of that car that you need to constantly throw money at to keep working. But the Liberty Ford Pinto doesn't have quite the same ring to it.
All right, so I think that's where that ends. So honestly, I'll give my honest truth on this one. The majority of these are either only kind of false or outright not false at all. Or in some cases, they assert things that people in America grew up believing that I've never heard before in my life. So maybe I'm unique in that, but I've been a fan of history since I was 8 years old. And some of the stuff he said that we all grew up believing I'd never heard. Like I'd never heard that the Liberty Bell was rung too much and broke on Independence Day. I had never heard that the Declaration of Independence was supposedly written on hemp. The thing about the flag, he was wrong about, though he is right that that is not the official Confederate flag and never was. So yeah, kind of a mixed bag, but let me know your thoughts about that stuff, but also about other stuff that people tend to get wrong, that are false things throughout history. Use the comment section below, drop a like if you would, check out some of my other videos, and make sure you subscribe and hit that bell so you never miss another video. Thanks for watching.